Hi, everybody. I'm author Douglas A. Burton, and today I'm going to talk about an archetypal design in storytelling. So, you're trying to design a scene, and understanding archetypal designs is very important because it can help you understand how to construct the scene, what to do with the characters, and most importantly, what it means underneath the hood. A lot of these things are not just tropes, they're not just stereotypes. They recur in stories because they actually are grounded in something real in the world and have profound meaning in the human experience. So, one of the big ones is the Shield-Maiden moment. We all know the hero's journey, where we have seen a hero who has departed his native culture and he goes off into liminal space, crosses a threshold. And at the end of the film or the story or the book, the hero often has an act 3 climax where they face off with the villain and the hero takes the field and confronts the villain. He or she has trained for this and they are now prepared to confront the villain. So it's a big thing when the hero does this. But note, it is often mired in single combat, and there is not always a second individual or another character on this battlefield. Or if there are people, they are onlookers. They're observing the fight from the sidelines. But that's one archetypal design, and that has its own meaning. But the one I wanted to talk about tonight was the Shield-Maiden moment. It's easy to confuse with the hero's journey climax, but there are very specific features to look for, or if you're writing a chapter, to include to make it a Shield-Maiden moment. One, the Shield-Maiden is almost always in her native culture, and the person they're facing, either the villain or the monster, it's on home turf. So that's one dynamic that is very, very different with the Shield-Maiden moment. Two, there is almost always a second character that shares this space with them. And this character is vulnerable and usually just a few feet away inside this space. That's very specific to the Shield-Maiden moment. And two, the Shield-Maiden moment isn't just single combat. It's when the Shield-Maiden physically interposes herself between the vulnerable character and the villainous character or the monster that shares this space. That's important because the heroine is drawing a red line. So in your story, this may be the perfect scenario to set up. The red line is a hard stop. This you cannot pass. The heroine is blocking the advance of this individual. So the Shield-Maiden is the first responder and the sole enforcer of this red line. Another characteristic, this isn't just combat to the death, which is very characteristic of the hero's journey. The Shield-Maiden intends to survive this because the purpose for the Shield-Maiden moment is to protect that vulnerable character, whoever they may be. So if the Shield-Maiden is just leaping in front of a bullet in an act of self-sacrifice, that defeats the super rational logic of re-engaging against a monstrous individual or a monstrous villain. Because if the Shield-Maiden dies, the vulnerable character remains and could also perish in that. So the Shield-Maiden must not only draw the red line and confront this character, but they must also survive this confrontation in order to protect the vulnerable character. Very, very specific details for Shield-Maiden moments. So let's take a look at some of these. They're all over the place. One of my favorites, almost impossible to forget, is in Aliens, where Ripley she's on her ship. Remember, the Sulaco is home space. This is home for Ripley. She thinks she's safe there. So when the Queen Alien is confronting Ripley, her first instinct is to what? To run away, to withdraw. That's a rational act. So she withdraws. Problem with the Shield-Maiden logic, there's a vulnerable character that's still threatened by this menacing villain. In this case, the Queen Alien. What does she do? She must re-engage this space and she must confront the Queen Alien. And that's exactly what she does. So you see all the dynamics. Home space, home turf. Shield-Maiden draws the line, confronts, and there's the vulnerable character just a few feet away. In Avatar, we see the same thing. In Neytiri, so if you center the story on Neytiri, Pandora is her native culture. So she belongs there. And the vulnerable character in this circumstance is Jake Sully himself. He's vulnerable to Quaritch's attack. She interposes herself in between the villain of the story and this vulnerable character. Ex Machina, we see Ava. She is trying to escape the labyrinth herself, and we have the villain, which is Nathan. The vulnerable character just a few feet away is Kyoto, and we see her turn and face Nathan and confront him in a dramatic fashion. We see a similar thing in Poltergeist, where Diane Freeling, and there's that great shot where the hallway stretches and she charges toward the action. She doesn't run from the danger. She charges toward the danger. And once again, when she enters this space, she's where? In her home. And there are, in this case, two vulnerable characters in between this monstrous entity and the vulnerable characters. In Infinity War, we get a very dramatic one. You have Vision, the vulnerable character in this case, and you have Thanos, one of the most powerful beings in the entire universe. And Thanos is advancing on Vision. And in a perfect snapshot of what the Shield-Maiden is, you have brutality in front, vulnerability behind, and the Shield-Maiden in between. In Game of Thrones, Season 1, Episode 2, The King's Road, Bran is the vulnerable character, and you have the Shield-Maiden, Catelyn Stark, and there's an assassin in the room. And again, on home space. When the assassin goes to advance on Bran, Catelyn rushes in and she grabs the blade with her bare hand. It's a pretty impressive moment there. In Gone with the Wind, Scarlett O'Hara kills one person in the entire story, and it's this Union soldier. Once again, he's encroaching on home space, and there is, not only does she stand in between and draws the red line with this Union soldier, the vulnerable character is right behind her. Some other dramatic moments. In Fellowship of the Ring, Frodo is a vulnerable character, and Lady Arwen is the one who's going to protect him. And there's this great chase. And keep in mind, the Nazgul in Fellowship of the Ring, they may just appear to be riders in black, but these are culture destroyers. By the end of this trilogy, these things are descending from the clouds to destroy Minas Tirith. These are what's pursuing Lady Arwen in Fellowship of the Rings. And she's got Frodo, and she even draws her sword at one time and come and claim him, she says, to dare these things. And of course, the red line in this case is the river. And once they attempt to cross the river, they are wiped out for the time being. But once again, one of the most famous Shield-Maiden moments is in Return of the King. Lady Éowyn, this time, is on a field of battle. And this is Gondor, so this is considered the good guys' territory. And you have the vulnerable character. It's not a child or anything like that. It's the king. It's King Theoden, and he's down on the ground. He's vulnerable. And advancing on him is the Witch King of Angmar, who's going to destroy him. And what happens? The Shield-Maiden literally physically interposes herself between the vulnerable king and this monstrous creature, and she fights him right there on the battlefield. And keep in mind, again, the king is just a few feet away. In King Kong, this one is a little subtle, but amazing. In reality, the vulnerable character is King Kong himself. He's down to his final space. He's on top of the Empire State Building, and he's in real danger. And the biplanes line up for their final advance. They're going to gun him down, and Andaro physically interposes herself between the strafing attack from the biplanes and King Kong himself. In Pan's Labyrinth, Ophelia takes the baby. She goes into a labyrinth. She's pursued by her stepfather, who's a very dangerous individual, and he's got murderous intent. And she is trying to protect this small, vulnerable baby from this advancing villain. In Silence of the Lambs, the showdown between Clarice Starling and Buffalo Bill. It's not just a showdown. We've seen that she is trained in more classic hero's journey fashion. She's trained by the FBI for combat, and of course, this plays a role. But notice, once again, she's in a residential home. She's in Buffalo Bill's basement. And although the masked Minotaur is there, there is that second vulnerable character, Catherine Martin, that is sharing this space with her. And she's in between the two. In Stranger Things, 11, one of her most iconic moments is her Shield-Maiden moments, where she comes in and she steps in between something terrifying and vulnerable characters, which are right behind her, and she stops them. She draws that red line and she stops these villainous creatures, and it's usually accompanied by a nosebleed. Terminator 2, the T-1000 is almost an indestructible entity, a terrible villain, but Sarah Connor has to go nose to nose with this villain. And who's right there? John Connor. So there is a vulnerable character sharing that space right with her. Tron Legacy. I was just watching this the other day, and I was like, there it is again. It actually happens a couple times. Cora, who's the female heroine of the story, alongside Sam Flynn and later Kevin Flynn. Around the midway point, there's an attack on Sam Flynn, and she leaps right in front of him right before the battle begins, and she interposes herself between the combatants. And then more importantly, at the end, when Clue, who's the villain of the story, is advancing on them, she leaps in front. She interposes herself between the villain and the vulnerable character, and she tries to stop the advance yet again. One of my favorites and unexpected ones is Star Trek The Motion Picture. There's this great scene at the end, and again, it's in Act 3, as you would come to expect. Decker is trying to key the final sequence into V'ger to merge with V'ger, and they're going to create a new life form. And Kirk, although he's not the villain of the story, he's advancing on Decker, and Ilia throws Kirk to the ground like a rag doll. But once again, she's drawing a red line, and the message of this red line is, you shall not advance a step further. And then who could forget Wonder Woman, one of the most famous Shield-Maiden moments of all time in the modern era. The vulnerable character in this case, the Allies in World War I. And of course, she enters no man's land, and it's an incredible Shield-Maiden moment because the Germans open fire on her. She's the only target on the battlefield, and she is interposing herself between the bad guys and the vulnerable characters right behind her. And she's withstanding bullets, a barrage of bullets. Her knees are buckling. She's standing there with the shield. It's a very dramatic moment, and it's one of the most memorable moments of the film. And I'm telling you, it's memorable because of this archetypal power that's hidden inside this design. Also, we have in Braveheart, there's this small scene, even she's not even the lead character, but one of the English lords comes in to claim prima nocta, and a fight breaks out, and these English knights are about to kill a lot of the Scotsmen. And before blood is spilled, the heroine of this moment gets in between the English knights and her husband, who has a knife to his throat, and she diffuses the entire situation. And then who could forget in Conan? So Conan might be a hero's journey story for Conan himself, but if you look at the female characters in the show, there are two Shield-Maiden moments. One is iconic, but one is in the beginning. There's these berserkers from the snake cult coming in, and they destroy Conan's village. And once again, you are on home space for Conan's mom. And when Thulsa Doom and these, undefeatable characters advance on her, she draws her sword. She is drawing a red line. And this is important to me in Conan because it shows you that not all heroines win this contest. The Shield-Maiden actually fails. Now, by the end, Conan is in his epic climactic battle. Single combat. It's single combat with two different combatants. And there's this one point where Conan is down. He's vulnerable. And one of the villains comes in to strike and kill Conan. And Valeria comes back from the dead in full regalia. She blocks the sword strike that would have killed Conan. And she has her famous line,
"Do you want to live forever?"
And who has ever forgotten that moment? It's one of the most memorable moments of Conan the Barbarian. And why? Because it is this archetypal thing. There's something about the archetypal designs that is buried in our psyches. So if you have a scene that you are designing as a writer, you could design the scene around these aspects. So once again, just to recap, what are the different components of this archetypal design, the Shield-Maiden moment? One, usually you're on home turf. Two, there's a monstrous individual, if not the primary villain of the story, advancing. There is a second vulnerable character that shares this space. The heroine will physically interpose herself in between these two and draw the red line. She intends to survive this confrontation. That is the super rational logic. And once again, I say super rational because the rational thing to do is primal. Flee. Save yourself. So the super rational logic is to not flee and to stand right face to face with the villain or the dangerous creature, the monstrous individual, in order to make sure that the vulnerable character is protected. These are huge. Lilu does it in The Fifth Element. She is the fifth element. She is the physical shield that is blocking all of Earth from destruction. You'll see this repeated everywhere, and it is markedly different from the climactic showdown in the hero's journey, which is no less significant, but it has different meanings. There's different context to the archetypal design of single combat with the hero and the villains in the Act 3 of the story. So I hope you enjoyed this. That's an archetypal design, something you can immediately apply to your story. It's usually in Act 3, but it can take place anywhere. So thanks for listening.